Hi everyone, welcome. These two tubs are my newest worm composting systems. It was 24 days ago that I harvested a tray of European night crawlers. That's what the ENC abbreviation here stands for. And there was so many in that system that when I pulled all the worms out, it seemed to me like I had plenty to launch off two systems. And that's what I did down here. So I got tray number one and tray number two. And what I did with the castings themselves was held on to them with the assumption that the worms had left behind a whole bunch of cocoons that might need some time to hatch, and then we'll round the babies up at some point in the future. After only 24 days, I'm guessing it's still just cocoons, but I want to make sure the moisture in here is adequate. So we'll do a quick check on that, and then we'll get these systems fed. So let me get on a glove, and we'll get these systems up on the bench, get to work. So we're starting down here in the nursery tray. Like I said, 23 days to me seems like maybe insufficient time to expect much from a cocoon nursery. Although some more mature cocoons that may have been in here for a while could have actually started yielding babies, so that's cool. Maybe we'll see something. Like I said, I think I'm only interested in making sure about moisture levels in here. And since we've had these numerous coverings on top here, hopefully we've been able to keep a lot of the moisture from leaving the system through evaporation. The top surface is definitely dry, but usually you don't have to go very deep to get at some slightly darker and more moist material. So I think we're good, but we do have a certain amount on the surface that's a little bit drier than it needs to be. We're not going to react to that right away. This stuff over here isn't really trying to collect worms. It's really just meant to hold some of the large composting items that had been in the system that we had harvested and we had pulled the worms from. That's it's a really big pumpkin stem. In here I could see a couple wormies coming together. Maybe there'll even be a few more down here within the more damp material right below where that collection of stuff had been. Hopefully that's representative of the moisture throughout this system. We're not going to be looking to pull worms out. We're just looking to give the cocoons in this system the time they need to all hatch. And you know, you could see some of what we're expecting to see here. Some pretty puny worms, ones that could have just been recently hatched. So I'm going to set this aside briefly. I was actually thinking maybe we just till even some of this drier stuff down into the material in general, just in case there's stuff in that top dry layer that also needs moisture. And at the same time we can do a quick application of a little bit of spray water in here. I don't know, I guess I was prepared to not put some in here if we felt like there was ample moisture. But as this dry stuff gets blended in, I got a feeling we're going to very rapidly take this system from having what the worms consider to be a good moisture level to something that they might not really consider so good anymore. There's like a real rapid decrease in moisture level. Hopefully it's not enough to throw the worms off or get them panicky. Like I said, I'm going to compensate. I figure let's do a quick stir and mixing in general first, and then we'll apply whatever seems appropriate to the combined material. I'm seeing a good number of little wormies. And once again, I have to remind myself of what this material was when it started a few weeks ago. It was material that I deemed to be depopulated. That's what that's what I started with in terms of the worms being separated from their castings, the worms going off to start the two new bins, and then this stuff being left behind strictly as a nursery with, I guess, with a certain amount of knowledge that some of the worms in here are going to be ones that just evaded my collection efforts when I did the haul out and relocation, but a good number of them, obviously the really, really small ones, are ones that you have to assume were born in here recently. Very nice material, which is what you would expect from the batch of more or less finished castings. I guess I'm kind of searching around, sensing for anything that appears to be clumping together, but we definitely don't have that going on here at all. All nice and flaky and loose, even making me question whether I want to add moisture. Mainly because at some point soon I'm thinking I might want to try to motivate these worms to come together in some one collection area. You know, we could use something like a bait box sort of like I've used here, where these plastic containers have a bunch of holes on the bottom. In fact, I even grabbed one from some strawberries that I ate the other day, and it's a much larger container. I even thought that if we do go with the bait box approach, I've got a somewhat larger one we could use. But I typically migrate, I like to have one side of the bin set up as the place where I want the worms to go to, and the other half is what's considered as the finished material that we're trying to vacate the worms from. Very tempted to do nothing, because it does actually feel pretty darn good, and I'm thinking if some of the dry stuff in here does draw some of the existing moisture out of the material, then I don't know. You know what? I've got this little tiny bit of leftover BTI mix, and I do see a couple little flying insects here and there. So even though I feel like for the most part I've tackled the flying insect issue, here and there I've been using a little bit of what I had left, and that's pretty much it now, to treat places where I thought it might help, or places where I thought I saw a little bit of insect activity. Most systems I'm seeing nothing nowadays, and hopefully it stays that way. But here it seemed like there was a little something going on, so maybe that little bit of BTI will be enough to, take care of preventing that next generation from becoming a whole bunch of flying insects. So, alright, this was pretty cool. I do see lots of worms in here, that's for sure. A lot of them are really puny. And I think if we just keep things going the way they are here, with just that little bit of moisture that we added, plus, combined with these coverings that we've been using, which seem to be doing a pretty decent job, I think we'll be able to preserve the moisture in here. Keep it down, keep it in the material for the most part. And it's not even so much the coverings, I believe it's just the nature of the castings themselves that resist drying and evaporation. But we'll probably end up with a top surface again that's a little bit dry, but hopefully that's just going to affect a very minimal amount of cocoons from hatching. Things look good in here. Let's get the first of the two bins out here that need to be fed. The feeding these systems got 14 days ago is probably nowhere to be found at this point. After 14 days, I believe that the cucumber peels and strawberries that we gave them are probably long gone. And we even gave this entire top coating a nice dose of leaves here, because we had a, how did it go? I think we had this newspaper resting down under all the leaves, and the leaves were the final thing we scattered across the top. So just the fact that the newspaper itself is clearly visible means they must have come by for the leaves and nibbled them all away, the ones that were out on the top surface. So I guess they were a popular item. I kind of thought they'd be. And a lot of the stuff out on the edge didn't get so popular only because it was exposed to the air and it was left dry, so this stuff they couldn't do much with, but pretty much everything that was beneath the bubble wrap got consumed. It feels like the moisture level in here is doing good. I never know what to expect with my newer systems. I always think that there's the potential for drying because the material, just by its nature, a whole bunch of shredded paper, cardboard, doesn't hold on to moisture too good on its own. So since I have no covers, or lids if you will, I do have covers. The covers I use are just those plastic sheets when necessary. Sometimes I'll switch to paper when it seems appropriate to do so. Eventually I'll even run my systems with no covering, something I never wanted to even consider doing in the past, but something I've been doing recently and it's been working just fine. Alright, so even though the feeding was placed down into the middle, I figured let's explore the rest of the bin before we get down there and in there to see what's happening, although my guess is that they came in for that cucumber and strawberry. They probably came in for that stuff pretty quick, gobbled it all up, and then proceeded on their merry way to explore the rest of the system. So I'm guessing by the time we get to the middle we're not going to see anything that's much different from what's out on the edges. I like what I'm seeing though. Seems like the worms have made themselves really at home throughout all four corners so far of the system. It also assumes that these long edges that we didn't really look at much are also doing well, and they are. Let's see how this long edge over here is doing. Alright, so maybe that's a sneak preview of what to expect in the middle where the feeding had been. I guess there we're going to maybe have a little bit of extra residual moisture from the food that had been put in there. Maybe the food's gone, but maybe the moisture that it brought with it remains in some of the material as just damp bedding. Seems pretty good down here, but nothing crazy as far as worms. I thought there might be a whole bunch hanging out down here to greet us. But if they've already done away with the food we gave them down in here, a long time ago, then maybe the moisture is the only thing keeping them around. Although moisture, yeah, I would say that the moisture everywhere feels really good, especially down low at the bottom, so there's no particular advantage to being in the middle. Just bedding materials that are not processed, just using whatever, using any old paper that's around. And that's what I figured I would do today. I figured I would just grab a couple of newspapers, crinkle up a few sheets of the stuff, and use that as our bedding in here. Now the food's a pretty good assortment of, well, each one's going to get a day's worth of coffee, so we'll bring that in. And then we'll explore what's in the plastic bag. It's a variety of fruits and veggies, just your assortment of kitchen scraps. So that's about half of the coffee that I bought down here. And what I like to do with my coffee sometimes is just combine it with whatever, something. Maybe some bedding, maybe some worm chow. That was worm chow, by the way. And in our assortment of foods, I thought we might take a quick look at what's available here so that we can sort of split it up fairly between the two systems. Alright, I see strawberry in here. I found a box of strawberries. I just mentioned their box. I showed you their box. Regrettably, a large number of them had already passed the point of no return in terms of being edible. So a lot of them just had mold growing on them and whatever, so I decided that they're going to get fed to the wormies. So these are pretty much off the top of the pile. So all this potato is really kind of frozen together, so I have to sort of grind off an outer layer of some of it so we could throw it in here for these little guys. I want to leave a fair amount for the other system. Down here there's a few leaves of lettuce too. Not a whole lot of that though to go around. We'll just give them a little chunk of it. Just so nobody feels like they've been left out. But I think we've probably distributed the feeding about halfway now. So I've got a little bit more of our worm chow that we could sprinkle in. I've got a little bit more of our coffee to use up here. And then even this coffee filter here, what we'll do is we'll save this as an indicator to show ourselves where we last fed. Can't remember if this system had a feeding zone indicator. I thought one of the two systems did. So if we find the old coffee filter in the other system, then we'll just include it with the bedding that the systems are getting. So, I don't know, is this too much? They always say you can't go wrong with what appears to be too much bedding, or something about no such thing as too much bedding in the worm bin. So it seems like a good few sheets of newspaper would be a welcome addition. Let's just give them a little bit more. Here, I think we've used up half the food. We've given them some worm chow. We can even toss in a little bit of grit to help with the digestion of their foods. But I think this looks pretty good. Why don't we just start bringing back some of the material that we have here. Getting this feeding area covered up. I'm just debating on the amount of moisture that would have come in with those potato peels, with those pieces of lettuce, with those strawberries, with the foods that we just gave them, whether or not it's a feeding that's going to kind of go dry because of all the dry newspaper we tossed in here, or is it a system that's going to start getting more damp because of the foods that we just gave them as those things start to thaw out. and emit their moisture. All that moisture underneath the plastic will start to circulate, so my guess is that I think we'll be okay. The moisture in general throughout the system feels pretty good too. So we'll go back to covering with our traditional feeding zone indicator. And I think we just had a sheet of newspaper sitting out here on top too, which they seem to really like and nibble on a bunch. They did definitely go for the leaves that we put out here for them last time. So this time if we put this out here for them, I wonder how they're going to like it. I got a feeling they're going to come up and nibble on this too. So I think we're in good shape here. Hopefully the same recipe for feeding the other bin will be equally suitable. Let's go get that one and get that one fed too. This one somehow feels lighter, I think. Is that the best way to describe it? Maybe it is. Maybe just a little bit. Sometimes I just wonder if that could be the moisture level of the system being not quite as high as the one that I'm comparing it to. So here I see this is the one that had a feeding zone indicator, as well as I think this was actually put in here as a replacement last time, as a new top covering, which is holding up great, so I think we'll just keep it in that function for one more round. But this thing, we're just going to use it as bedding in our feeding. So let's see how the worms are doing. See a few of them are hanging out on the surface, enjoying the moisture that's collecting under the plastic. Here too, they've done away with a good bit of the leafy top covering I gave them, but not quite as well as the previous bin that we just checked in on. Look at that. We don't want this guy in here. So I don't have mercy on the centipedes. I wipe them out as soon as I see them. So this guy's toast. I don't want these little guys living in my bins. They prey on worms, and we don't need them around. So they are always on the most wanted list around here, and I deal with them with extreme prejudice when I encounter them. So there's a good bit of, remaining fresh shredded paper type bedding to be found all over the place, and you saw there was a good amount of worms hanging out down within the material too. I do feel a good bit of moisture as I reach to the bottom, and there's a good bit of casting material, which is probably accounting for the moisture being there. Very nice. As you can see, I'm sort of just blending in all those leaves that had been placed out here as top covering last time. I think the worms will appreciate that too, but I think that too will bring with it a little bit of drying to the stuff that you're mixing it with, so I just want to keep that in mind so I don't do anything in here that's going to cause the worms to feel uncomfortable or panicky because of sudden drying. Oh, here too we've made a nice little opening where the last feeding had been applied. I don't think I see much, if anything, of what I could consider to be leftovers, which is not too surprising since, like I said, last time these guys were fed cucumber and some strawberries. How lucky they are to be getting strawberries once again today. And here I got a little bit more newspaper over here to give them. And I just managed to spill a whole bunch. Let me see if I could scoop that up before we spread it all over the place. Alright, here's a little bit more coffee for you guys. Then I've got a couple of these for these guys too. A couple more of these cardboard tubes with a little bit of soft paper attached to them. And let's see if we could get some more of this newspaper down in here as our basis for the feeding. So in again with more coffee again. Ooh, wow. That's why it spilled, because the seam burst open. So about half of it spilled out. That pretty much works with my plan anyway. Kind of try to spread this stuff out. As far as the kitchen scraps go, I think everything just all went into one layer. So we'll do the same here. Try to spread it out evenly. It does seem like we did a pretty good job distributing the food fairly so that each system got some. All this stuff as it thaws gets a little bit damp and wants to stick to the plastic bag. Makes for a little bit of a messy scene. Sometimes I like to try to put the frozen stuff over right into something plastic so it's easier to wipe out. But that looks like a pretty nice feeding for these guys. Hopefully it's not too much. It looks like a feeding comparable to what they got last time. But if what they got last time was too much, we'll never know, because we just didn't come back here in time to figure out how the two bins did against one another. As far as just, you know, what I saw visually in terms of how many worms are in here, it does look to me like we probably got a pretty good fair split. You know, both systems appear to have what seems to me like a comparable number of worms, pretty much an equal number in each. So I think we're almost at the point where we can set our new feeding zone indicator aside to cover up with at the end. And I've also preserved one piece of the newspaper so we can have sort of a comparable covering up in both bins. Here too, I'm feeling like we're doing pretty good. Actually, you know what? We've already decided ahead of time that we're going to hang on to the existing top covering newspaper that was new last week, or 2 weeks ago when we last checked in here. So this piece, what do we do with it? Just sort of shoehorn it down into the feeding area, and hopefully it comes in handy for these little guys. Works for me. So I think we're pretty much done here. Here again, I do feel like I've got this option to grab my squirt bottle and apply moisture, but you know, once all those veggies start to thaw out and emit their moisture, the plastic covering is just going to prevent it from evaporating. Naturally, some of the material around the edges will dry because it will have access to the air, but the rest of it underneath the covering won't, and it'll stay nice and damp, and I think we'll be in good shape here. At any time in the future, if we think things are getting a bit dry, we can always come in with a squirt bottle, but I don't want to get in the habit of, you know, always applying moisture and making things too wet. There is a balance point, and I want to keep it. So that's it for today's video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.